Thank you. Well, I was introduced to this congregation on Sunday morning, September 8th, at the 9:15 service. Eileen and I shared our I Am From poems, which involved creating a poem around three things from our childhood home, three things from the neighborhood that we grew up in, three things from the backyard, some family members and phrases from childhood and food that we loved, and formative events. And as I was creating and sharing this poem, it occurred to me that the story of how I came to be here began on the day that I was born. Attending to my own story as it began to merge once again with the story of yet another Unitarian Universalist congregation, and part of the larger faith to which I have dedicated more than half of my life, helped me to feel that continuity from my very beginnings. So whether this is your very first time in this place, or whether you feel of this moment as familiar as your old bathrobe, how you have come to be here began on the day that you were born. As much as at times I would wish it to be so, there are no really new beginnings that are not in some way informed by what has gone before. Our individual stories unfold moment by moment, experience by experience. Attending to that unfolding waxes and wanes, often due to the fact that individual stories are also being shaped by our relationship to others whose stories are unfolding alongside our own, in reaction to our own, and sometimes in opposition to our own. These relationships are the stuff of families and communities that in turn give rise to a larger story as they merge with the stories of other families and other communities. This means that at any moment there is, well, a lot going on. There's so much that our personal stories cannot be captured as a whole. And to complicate it, it also seems that it is hardwired into the human psyche a desire to be seen and known by others, loved even, and appreciated for our efforts to contribute to a common good, to have our lives matter, to find meaning and experience and beauty, and ultimately simply to connect. The most universal way that we have found to do that is through story. Stories are the currency of our lives. From the simple answer to the question, how are you? To the fascination with the lives of celebrities, the consumption of movies and television and novels and biographies, and the human interest sagas of the daily news, we are drawn into the stories of others as we look to understand our own lives. And so by necessity, we must pick and choose what parts of our stories we share and how we share them and with whom. This process of picking and choosing and sharing our story shapes what we know as our identity. Who we become arises out of the stories we tell, or as referred to in this morning's reading, to the narrative of our lives. When we attend to our stories, we acknowledge that there is always more than one story about anything, and that there are, for better and for worse, consequences to the one we choose to tell. I've spent a good deal of time since my retirement from full-time settled ministry, exploring the power of story. In particular, the power of personal story and the ways in which the narrative we use to tell our stories both reflects the past and shapes the future. In my other life, the one away from you here, I have a life review practice which involves hearing people's stories. More important than me hearing the story is that I am witness as others attend to the consequences of the story that they tell and consider how a fuller claiming of that story might impact the direction of their lives. Well, there are many steps in this claiming process. I received a really important lesson from my granddaughter. Her grandpa and I were staying with her and her little brother while their parents were away for a weekend. And on the morning of the parents' return, before they got there, Zoe, our granddaughter, and my husband and I were playing, actually, the name of the game was Dogopoly. It's kind of a way to put Monopoly over on kids without their knowing it. But I had left the game briefly to attend to the little brother, and Zoe left the table and went to watch a video with those little headphones on her head. And so after a little while, when she didn't come back, my husband went in and picked up the earphone and said, are you done playing the game? And she said that she was, and so we cleaned up the game. So when the video ended, she came back to the table, and you can guess what happened. "Where's the game?" she demanded. "Well, we put it away. You said you were done." Outrage, tears. No, I meant just not right then. "Oh, we could play again." "No, I want to play that game. I was winning." More tears, a slammed bedroom door. I gave her a little while, and then I went into the bedroom and I said, Zoe, I'm so sorry that there was a misunderstanding about the game. Grandpa and I both heard you say that you were done playing. We didn't take time to be sure that we understood. This sounds like a story with an unhappy ending. "Yes," she said, "and it's a true story." "Yes, it is," I said. "Maybe there is more to the story that can give it a different ending. Why don't you think about it? And if you can figure out a way to make a different ending, Grandpa and I will be in the other room waiting." In a few minutes, she came out and said, "I want to play the game again." Well, by this time, I had started doing dishes. And I said, "So could you and Grandpa just play the game now?" And she said, "No, you have to play with us because that's part of my happy ending." And so, of course, I did. And it's a true story. For better or for worse, whatever story we tell, even a lie, carries a truth. It is the truth of the felt, if often unconscious, need of the storyteller to shape or to preserve some aspect of identity in relation to the big story that connects all of us. And there is almost always more than one true story. I live in a small community near the shore of Lake Superior. When I worked at the Duluth church, I drove the 18 miles home many, many winter nights in the snow and the dark. And one night I hit a deer with my car. The airbag deployed. The damage to the car was, it turned out, to be substantial. The damage to the deer, because it disappeared into the woods, was undetermined. I am sad for the deer, of course, but I will say that it provided for me an opportunity to consider more than one story. I sat uninjured, a little shaken, for a moment in the car, and I found after a moment of reflection that I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude and humility, of the awareness of what it means to be a person of privilege. I was driving from my job to my home, an employed homeowner. I used my cell phone to call my husband, who had another car. He came to where I was and we called AAA. They recommended that we have the car towed to a repair shop and be reimbursed by our insurance company because it might be a distance outside of that paid by our AAA coverage. The whole experience delayed my normal return home by about 30 minutes. The car was towed and repaired in a week. I missed no work, and if I had, my pay would not have been docked. But it will come as no surprise to any of you that when, in days to come, I began the story with, "I hit a deer on my way home," the immediate response was, "Oh, how terrible." A true story in either case. As I attend to this story, I ask myself, so what does telling this story say about me? How might it affect the listeners? What is it about? Is it a story that connects me to a larger story? Listen to the stories we tell. Children will listen, and so do others. Many of us learned at a very early age how stories can be changed in the telling. How many of you remember playing telephone? I also remember us calling it gossip. Sitting in a circle, a designated person writes a phrase on a piece of paper in secret and then whispers it to the person next to them. And so then that phrase gets whispered all the way around the circle until the last person says it out loud. Much hilarity when the message emerges, often as at best a garbled version of the original message, and at worst, sometimes something totally different altogether. Stories are transformed in the telling. Sometimes, as in the telephone game, they are changed by the mode of transmission. Whispering in someone's ear, for example, is limited both by volume and the awkwardness of that level of closeness. In addition, there is no context for the message except the game itself. It is, however, remarkable how the stories we pass on in a normal voice in more complete contexts become garbled in interpretation and projection as they become part of a larger story. For better and for worse, we can choose stories that reinforce some aspect of another story. In her work on forgiveness, Christina Robinson writes about the power of the grievance story. I am wronged. Someone has hurt or offended me. I tell the story. It is a true story. The offense occurred. I was offended. I share the story with a third party. What I often fail to attend to is that the third party's reaction is about to become part of my story. That's terrible, my third party says. You must be furious. Who does he think he is? He shouldn't be allowed to blah, blah, blah. The grievance is set and growing. When a community culture grows up around these kinds of responses, I'm sorry. When a community culture grows up around these kinds of responses, it grows pockets of discontent. What might happen in a culture in which the response is simply, I wonder what his story is. Do you think he meant to offend you? Much has been written about how stories have been used to celebrate and strengthen an existing culture. Stories provide continuity in our lives, conveying a sense of our history and our heritage. Look around you. What do you know of the stories of others? Your very presence here, right now, is part of a larger story that may have similar elements to many others in this room. The stories that define the culture are your stories. They are what draw and hold you here. So how do you tell the story of your church, your faith, your community, your history? What are the stories that newcomers tell about their experience at UCE? What are the stories you tell among yourselves? What are the stories we share with newcomers that brings them back or sends them away? What do you want people to believe about UCE? And how do you live into those stories? Can we tell a balanced stories that acknowledges the truth of your challenges as well as the promise of your amazing assets? Embedded in the work of the Interim is the potential for claiming a bigger story. During my visit in September, there were many opportunities for me to hear your stories. There were many kinds of stories. There were stories of disappointment and hurt and loss. There were stories of concern and heartbreak and disillusionment. And there were stories of pride about the past and the hope about the future, of strength and determination, of success, as well as fatigue and concern about resources. And in the time since then, there has been some new emerging stories, a successful capital campaign to update your kitchen and your bathrooms and outdoor spaces. And last night, there was a spirit-filled auction. All of this is part of your story. The story of UCE is not, nor ever shall be, a story of perfection. But it can be a story that includes a history of past regrets, mistakes, and missed opportunities that have become understood as lessons that have led to new learnings, rather than defining moments that will plague you forever. It can also be a story of transforming gifts. This can be a story of hope and possibility that leads away from the direction of continuing disappointment that comes from a history of unmanaged expectations. A story that includes trust that promises broken can be remade. Of a church that knows itself to be a laboratory for making meaning out of uncertainty, as well as a haven for comfort and security, both boundaried and in principle and in covenant, and open to change. Is that a story you're willing to tell while at the same time attending to the church with a painful past and a series of unhappy endings? In her TED Talk on the danger of a single story, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie speaks of how all of our stories make us who we are, and to insist that only the good stories or only the bad stories is to flatten out our experience. The single story, either the story of our proudest moments or the stories of our greatest disappointments, are true. But one without the other is incomplete, and they make the one story the only story. When as a minister I have had the opportunity to talk to newcomers about membership, I always offer one guarantee. Are you ready? All right. Though newcomers are often bedazzled by the true promise of our faith, I will always say, if you stick around here long enough and become at all involved, you will be disappointed. In spite of my best efforts, I will say something in a sermon that will offend you or someone you love. The music director will pick a piece of music that you will find inappropriate in church. The priorities outlined in the budget will go against your values. The janitor will forget to replenish the toilet paper. The minister or another member will express an opinion in a way that is disrespectful or unkind. And so the guarantee comes from the endless possibilities that exist in even the most well-meaning and principle-based human institutions. How you work with those disappointments will determine your part in the larger story of your community. What I cannot predict is what part those disappointments will come to play in the history of the community itself. So if you're new to UCE today, you'll be surprised to know that this is a congregation whose story includes disappointment. Surprising, I think, because of the apparent vitality that one might experience as you enter this place, not only today, but any day of the week. If you read the announcements and the newsletter, you will see that there is much happening here. There are groups and activities of many kinds, social and educational, justice-centered, spirituality-centered, as well as opportunities for people of all ages. We invite you to find your place in that story. Many years ago, shortly after my divorce and before online dating, I entertained publishing an ad in the personals of my local reader. Slightly overweight, overeducated, underemployed, divorced mother of 3 children under 10 with a substantial unpaid education loan seeks suitable companion. Now there's a true story. It never made it to press, but I have often wondered what kind of a response it might have gotten. That was a true story. Revealing the rest of it would have really been fun. In September, the part of the story we heard contained pain about the past ministries. They were true stories. They were also partial. Next week, as we attend to our gratitude, we will be endeavoring to share more of the redemptive legacies of UCE's past ministries. We've collected some of those stories, some of the best of those ministries that continue to inform the present in life-giving ways. I will speak of some of those, and we will have a place for you to post your memories and reflections of how your history and the story of UCE was shaped for better by those whose leadership, who possibly fell short even of their own best intentions. My greatest hope for this interim time as you engage with me in setting the course for your future is that you can claim that fuller story, a story that includes a history of past regrets, mistakes, missed opportunities, understood as lessons that have led to new learning rather than defining moments that will plague you forever. It can also be a story of transforming gifts, This can be a story of hope and possibility that leads away from the direction of continuing disappointment that comes from a history of unmanaged expectations. A story that includes trust that promises broken can be remade. Of a church that knows itself to be a laboratory for making meaning out of uncertainty, as well as a haven for comfort and security, both boundaried in principle and covenant, and open and excited about change. May it be so.